Welcome to the Professional Development Team's Café today. We are going to be doing fellowship interview logistics, and we picked this topic for this timeline because I think a lot of us are in the phase of planning our interview season. There are some changes to the timeline for this year. I think we're all learning a lot from virtual interviewing, and so there's been a lot of iterative change over the last few years, and so we thought this would be a good time of year to go over this. We are recording, so if you have other people in your program who you think would like this information, or other programs that you didn't see here today, this will get posted on the ONTPD's YouTube link. And I'm sure we could send out the reminder of the link after we're done so that people can find it. But it will live on there. So if next year you want to review any of this, we'll be there. There are about four of us in the professional development committee. One of us is missing today, but you'll see me, Megan, you'll see Patrick, who's listed as ONTPD host, and you'll see Brooke. We also have panelists joining us today. Chriselle, Scott, Meredith, and Liz, who are all going to be available to take questions on what their program's done, what's worked well, what isn't working well. And then we've got some links in the slides as well, so I'm sure we can send those out so people can have the links. As a reminder, the general fellowship timeline is posted on the ONTPD webpage. This is a great place to remind yourself of like, gosh, what should I be doing in September? And so if you have a regular meeting as a program, it's great to just go onto the ONTPD website, check in with the timeline and be like, oh, what am I up to this year? I highlighted the one that's most relevant to this conversation, which is the latter half of the year. And I think this highlights that the parallel paths of new fellows coming in and requiring onboarding is going to be overlapped pretty heavily with the interview season this year and the applicant packet review season and your annual program update, and that it's all going to be quite a bit more condensed. And I want to make sure everybody has heard out loud that match day is in November this year. It is even earlier. Your timeline is even tighter. And I will reiterate that Patrick sent out that we are recommended to all do virtual interviews, that's going to be the most safe and equitable way that we can reach our applicants. So I think most applicants are expecting to get virtual interviews. If you are someone who your DIO or your GME has not banned virtual interviews and you are planning to forge ahead with in-person, consider where you're going to land on that and how some applicants might perceive that offer for an in-person interview. So just something to think about. The more direct numbers for this year, because these are a little bit different. So ERAS is going to open to you on July 20th, and big chunk of your applications will be there in that first day because they will have already been submitted and just be waiting for you. This is a great time to get your interview dates solidified and calendar holds down for your faculty members who you think are going to be interviewing. Better to start with too many of them, and then as they fall out and say, hey, I can't do a meeting that day, or I could only do one candidate, then you've probably got a little bit of a surplus built in. If you are not already updating your website, go through and take a look, make sure all of your information is up to date. Make sure you're not mentioning anything about in-person interviews if that's not what you're doing this year. Update your current fellows, your graduated fellows, all that type of information. If you've had a change in your program director, APD, or program coordinator, please make sure that their email address is listed clearly, because sometimes applicants get lost in the flow and they don't know who they should contact for questions. This is another great time to take a look at what type of form are you going to use for people who are reviewing the packets. Are you going to use a score? Are you going to use some sort of a narrative assessment? What information are you going to record about packet reviews? How are you going to store that? And what process you're going to use to distribute your applications to all of your faculty members that are going to help you with that. So you can download a big bulk of them and begin your reviews as early as July 20th. Want to remind you into August that there are always applicants who are not ready on July 20th, and there are going to be applications that trickle in over the coming weeks. You are free to set your personal cutoff date for when you're not going to download anymore. It's really nice transparency if you put that on your website. If you say, we're done reviewing applications as of August 1st, or you'll have some people that turn them in and then never hear back from you and they don't know why. Into the August time, you want to decide what you're going to do for your interviewer forms. Are you giving them a score sheet? Are you asking them to write down their thoughts? Are you looking for some sort of a ranking? What are you going to ask people to do? Is it virtual or on paper where they're going to record this information? Highly recommend virtual. Paper always seems to develop little tiny legs and walks away, but completely up to you guys. And then you want to start offering interviews, and we'll go through each of these steps on its own slide. There are some programs that do start interviewing in August. So if that's something that sounds right for you guys based on your review timeline and what's feasible and when your interviewers are there are definitely programs that interview in August. Traditional interview season is going to be September and October. You get through all of your candidates, decide how you're going to integrate your scores from your packets with your interview scores into some sort of a meaningful rank list. If you have a rank list committee or you just use your program as the rank list committee, you want to set up a meeting time to meet with people, probably by the end of October, maybe the first week in November if you want to play it loose. And then rank list is due November 16th. And I want people to highlight that because that is much earlier than previous years. That is like the week before Thanksgiving. It's a really hard time of year. And then we'll have Thanksgiving break, which hopefully you'll get to luxuriate through because your rank list is already done and submitted. And then November 30th is going to be match day. And so, think ahead for how you're going to reward yourself. And everybody is in their own process of building out their holistic review process for your program. There are lots of resources, so we'll send this around with all the links, but the AAMC has a really well developed web page, videos, guides, and resources for how to kind of revamp your own interview and packet review to be more holistic. To sort of look at the whole applicant and then thinking about how that person fits together and would complement your program. There is even one that is specifically meant for fellowships. On that web page, if you kind of scroll down lower, it gets into the more fellowship specific information. And then we had a great ONTPD web page YouTube video link to the URIM experience of interviews. And I think it's really worthwhile to hear that as a program coordinator or program director, because there's things that we have all probably done or said that have not created the impact that we intended them to. So thinking about how things might land and whether or not there's anything you want to mitigate. There's a DEI toolkit and a DEI Neonatology holistic review on both Google Docs and Dropbox. I apologize if your firewalls are problematic with that. You can always try to do it on your phone and then save it and then put the file on something your firewall will get along with. When you're going to design your interview day, you have some choices. You get to pick how many interviewers per applicant. When we've asked that in ONTPD surveys in the past, it actually varies quite a bit. There are some places where a applicant might speak to 3 people from the program. There are others where applicants are speaking to more than 10. There's probably not a right answer, but I would argue I interviewed somewhere for fellowship that had 9 or 10, and that was, I couldn't even remember who I'd said what to. It was probably more than was needed. I don't know if anyone else is still doing that, but that's a lot. You can also choose to do panel interviews. You just want to think about how that's going to feel for applicants and make sure you're making it really low pressure. When you're picking your start and end times for virtual interviews, please remember that you will have applicants from different time zones. you don't have to accommodate everybody, but keep in mind when you're starting and stopping. So if you're an East Coast program and you want to start bright and early, that is very bright and early for your West Coast applicants. And if I want to run late in the day, that's well past dinner time onto the East Coast. So please build breaks in. It's easy in the virtual sphere to not build them in, and recommend that people turn their cameras off during them, because we've heard over and over again that people still feel obligated to stay on camera during the break, which is not a break. If you aren't building in time for people to have pump breaks or things like that, think about where in your interview process you're letting people know that they can request time to do breast milk pumping or feeding during that interview. Even if the majority of people are not lactating during the interview season, this is a signal that you're giving people that you're a family friendly program and that this is important to you, that you provide space for people who need space for things. There are different ways that you can match up your applicants based on interest or interviewer availability. There's pros and cons to each approach. So obviously you can try to match people more specifically, but then you're going to spend more of your time trying to finagle your harder to find faculty into giving an interview just with one person. You might prearrange your interviewers and let applicants self-select, say, hey, these are the days when my ethicist is able to interview. So pick between those. Or you may choose to have a very stable interviewer pool, which gives you nice consistency, but you may miss out on some of your different research avenues for that year. We did a ONTPD survey last year on recruitment. So we heard from 70 programs. At that time, 10% were expanding their complement. I don't know what the numbers would be this year, but just to know that the number of slots has gone up effectively every year for the US, and the number of applicants is not necessarily going up. We had a good year last year, and we don't know yet if that was a COVID effect or not. But in many of the previous years, we had more slots than applicants. So people do need to be prepared and prepare your division chief that not every program is going to fill no matter what you do. That way that doesn't come as a shock if that happens. Most programs chose to interview between 6 and 15 applicants per each spot. So if you're well below that or well above that, you might want to think about whether you're over or under doing it. Most programs are tracking their URIM numbers. A lot of our GMEs require this. Even if your GME doesn't require it, it's helpful for you to know if you're losing people through your piece of the pipeline. Are you not offering interviews to your URIM candidates, or when you're interviewing them, are they ending up, low on your rank list, and then doing some program introspection on why that might be happening. 2/3 of programs were able to have URIM faculty involved in recruitment. And if that's feasible at your location, it's been called out as an important factor for candidates to hear about. And it helps you, catch blind spots that you may have. I do want to call out that in at least in this data, a half of programs did not rank all of the URIM candidates they interviewed. You just want to think about if you've interviewed someone and you're not going to put them on your rank list, is there any chance that discrimination is going into that decision, and really just carefully considering why you're not putting someone on your rank list. Arranging and filling your interview dates. I know this is painful and it seems easier to do first come, first serve, but it disadvantages people who are on clinical rotations in the wrong time zone, on maternity leave. And so thinking about if you're able to come up with some way where the majority of the applicants get to put in their preferences for the interview dates before you assign the interview dates, that is one way to be a little more equitable. There are software solutions to this. I use RedCap because that's what I use for my research, so that's what I'm comfortable with, but there's plenty of places that use Doodle Poll, which dates are available. And then there's Thalamus, which I'm going to stop sharing so Brooke can share. You're muted, Brooke.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I am going to preface this with that um, I have no stock in Thalamus. It's what my program coordinator likes to use. I do not want it to come across. We do use Thalamus at UVA. It is a program that is used pretty much by a lot of the programs in pediatrics. You can basically you send the applicants a link to create their Thalamus ID. And then when they log on, this I want to exit archive mode. Okay. So basically when they log on, they will see what's called the preview of the profile, which can give you about the program, who to contact, the salaries you can put right there. You can put videos, all sorts of stuff on there. Also within this, they can schedule their interviews. We do all of the interviews through Thalamus so that it gives them basically a schedule for the day. And you can use Thalamus video. I don't love Thalamus video. So it actually just links them to a Zoom link that's on their schedule in Thalamus. And then they go right back to their schedule to see their next interview. So pretty much everything is just laid out in it. And then the nice thing is the faculty automatically get, when they're in Thalamus for the day, looking at their schedules as well, they can do the scoring right there in Thalamus. And you can create different scores. So this is like, we have two different ways to score. One is if you actually interview the candidate. The other is if you don't. Again, that kind of goes back to the holistic review that we let people, everybody can at least review the applicant's portfolio. And then we have a different scoring algorithm if you actually interview them. And then all of these scores get compiled into what we create as the rank list. But it does it right then and there. So there's no like having to send them another form or anything. It's all built into Thalamus. So I do like it. Feedback we get is that overall it works pretty well, and that the applicants like it. But that's what we use for the whole interview thing.
And it does have a cost associated
It does.
with it. Yes.
There's never not a cost associated with it. I have asked my program coordinator, and she says she hasn't renewed this year because it comes up in July. She does it. But it's about 3,000, but that gets split among pretty much all of the programs in pediatrics.
So that would probably be something to bring up with your GME office.
Our pediatrics program uses it as well.
Yeah. So it's possible your pediatrics program might have it, and it's worthwhile asking if that's something that looks attractive to people. The other thing to know about filling interview dates is that there's certainly fewer cancellations in the virtual sphere compared to the before times when people would realize that, yeah, I've spent all my money, or I've had good applications, in good interviews at 6 or 7 places. I don't need to keep going. So you will have few cancellations, but there might be some. So it's worthwhile to think about, are you someone that's going to offer a canceled spot to someone on your list, or whatever, and how you want to do that in the fairest way possible. For your interviewers, it is very helpful if you can share your program's mission, vision, and values. Each year, I know it feels repetitive, but if you're going to do a holistic review well, then the goal is to find candidates that align with your mission, vision, and values. And your interviewers can only do that if they have a clear picture of what you're trying to do here. Please share holistic review materials with your interviewers, even if you've done so in the past. Most of us need some reminders. Share your data collection tools ahead of time. People might have great feedback for you on what's working and what's not working. You should consider if bias reduction activities are something that you want to do with your faculty group and are feasible to do. And then there's always the question of should you do structured interviews or not? There are pros and cons to giving your faculty specific questions. And so there's no standard. You can choose what you want to do, but this is in the the AAMC interviewing guidelines. This is the table that I pulled out. So, are you going to give people an assigned topic that you want them to cover, or are you going to use behavioral or situational questions? And you may choose to give people behavioral situational questions, like, interviewer A is always going to ask about conflict in the interprofessional team, and interviewer B is always going to ask about an ethics case. Those are valid approaches to use that or not use that, and you'll have to decide based on your faculty group whether or not they're actually likely to execute that too. Every single year, you must go over the off-limits questions for your interviewers. No matter how many times you say it, there will be some interviewer in your group who just doesn't get that these are not things you can ask about. So, highlight that again, that, we don't ask about family status, even if it feels like we're in a nice casual conversation and we've shared our own family status. It still can come off as probing to applicants. And so you want to stay away from that. And I linked to the best practice guide where I got these from. So you do not want to be putting out red flags to applicants. So it's worthwhile. And now we have panelists, and you can ask any questions you want. And if questions are not obvious or forthcoming, we have some feeder questions we can use. So joining us today is Dr. Chriselle Mark Ariel from UC San Diego, Dr. Scott Wheelak from Medical College of Wisconsin, Meredith Feldman, who's the program coordinator out at CHOP, and Dr. Liz Wetzel from Indiana University.
If you're bashful, feel free to
Yes.
direct message me, Brooke or Megan, your questions. We're happy to read them out to you.
So I guess we can start with, so we have representatives from a smaller program, a medium-sized program, and a larger size program. So kind of where you are on that spectrum, but also how many applicants you tend to interview in a day would be a great place to start, because I think it varies based on the size of your program. So I guess we can start with Chriselle.
Sure. We interview maximum 6 per day, try to aim for 5. And we have 20-minute slots and then breaks in between, 5-minute breaks in between. So it's
How many
pretty
people
much a half day.
interview? Half day?
Mm-hmm.
And what size program are you?
We take 3 fellows each year.
Okay. All right. And Scott?
Yeah, we do 3 fellows each year. We do 2, maybe 3 per day. And I guess it's, especially over virtual, kind of a half day. We start about 10 a.m. being in, Central Standard Time Zone and finish sometime early afternoon. So, yeah.
And how many do you interview per slot? Maybe I missed that. I'm sorry. Like
we do 10. I think we usually interview about 30 for the 3 spots. So 10 per spot.
Liz.
Okay. So we take 3 fellows a year. We have typically 9 interview days, and do 3 fellows each day. So that ends up being about 27 interviews that we do. It's from about 7:45 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. We only interview on Mondays because we have them join our AM conference, which happens on Mondays, that reviews admissions. So we still have continued to limit interview days till Mondays. We made a couple exceptions in the past.
So one question I think that is one that is on everyone's mind is, now that the applicants can apply to so many programs without the travel cost, and that's great for them. We do see a lot of more uncertainty of people's true interest in your program. And has that led you, and I would feel it may be different kind of based on like CHOP or Boston Children's maybe, that have you felt that you had to interview more applicants due to the concern that you don't know exactly what people are thinking? I mean, I think CHOP told us they got 270 or something applications last year.
Yeah,
and there's
Meredith,
only
how many
two-
applications did you get?
It was, yeah, around that. It was, I think it was even close to 300.
But that's my point. There's only 300
Yeah.
applicants. And so how do you really know the interest? And do you feel that sometimes you need to increase your numbers because of that?
Meredith, do you want to start with that? And then also just do your numbers, like how many you interview and how many you
Yeah.
interview per spot?
So we have 6 spots and we usually interview around 40. This year we're going to interview 30 because we have somebody who's doing a dual fellowship who already matched in our program and they're starting in GI and then they'll be coming to us next year. So I think that's where we're going to drop our numbers down to 30 to a little less. So we start out with a spreadsheet where we kind of pull information from about each candidate, and there's certain things that we dump them into buckets. So so ones that we think are probably not as interested, we'll put them in a lower bucket. They usually, everybody on the committee can tell who is interested and who's not. And I think a lot of them are just such random. I mean, even I can tell by some of the applications, you can tell it's a stretch. Their credentials aren't as strong. But that's basically how we do it, try to break it up that way. And then the committee comes together and decides as a group.
Why don't we just keep the same order? So we just go,
Yeah, one of the things I want to focus on in this question is like, not everybody has, I'm just trying to be very honest here, not everybody has the CHOP name behind it.
Yep.
And for the programs that don't necessarily, that are sitting around 100, 150 applicants, how many of those people have applied to all of the places now that are stretches? And how do you decide kind of who to interview? Because that's the majority of the programs, right? Out here.
So usually in San Diego, we interview 40, but last year the selection committee felt so uncomfortable with that number. And I'm thinking like, oh, CHOP interviews 40, we're interviewing 40, and we have fewer slots. But my selection committee just felt like there were so many good candidates and we weren't sure, because a lot of people want to come to San Diego, but they have no ties to San Diego. And it just seems like a stretch. So we went up to 45 last year, but I'm going to try to keep us down.
That happened to us last year. There were so many great candidates, and we kind of go through and we look at their backgrounds and think like, are they really going to come to Philadelphia? So, I mean, obviously you can't assume, but that's something we look at as well.
So I think as those that represent the flyover states, as I hear Chriselle and Meredith talk, in the Midwest with maybe the smaller programs, I think we got a lot more applicants, and I think I would say both ends of the spectrum, so to speak. Like we got more where maybe it was a bit of a stretch, but I think we also got a lot that, quite frankly, were exceptionally strong candidates, and I felt like those of us maybe more in the middle part of the program, it was almost the opposite. Like we had honestly no chance. Like they were outstanding, and we'd be happy to have them, but know that they tend to go to bigger programs. So that was something we struggle with too, and I think we expanded our numbers because I think a couple of years ago when it first started, we didn't interview as many, and we were, and I think just as Meredith and Chriselle were talking to, looking a little more about who's likely to come here. I don't want to use up one of our few interview spots on somebody that really probably won't, or if that's the case, and you almost don't count that. Like we'll do 30, but there's an exceptional candidate, so like 30 plus this one person who we'd like to get, but maybe won't have the ability to.
We didn't change our numbers. I will say we really tried, and I'll echo the same thing. There were just a lot of really good fellowship applicants, like huge numbers. And we try to be pretty discerning in terms of if they gave indications of what they were interested in, if if that wasn't anything that we would able to be support or really find a link, then it seemed, well, that might be a little suspicious unless there's some tie to the Midwest and maybe they're looking to make a geographic change for other reasons. So in that initial kind of screening through, we tried to pay attention to that. And then when we initially send out an email interview, saying, yes, we'd like to interview it. And then we asked to have a phone call. So then we set up a time to have like a 5-minute phone call to learn a little bit more about their true scholarship. And then we use that information to help pair them with interviewees. So we've kind of taken that approach to maybe have some personalization to that. It's probably more work, but it seems to have worked out okay in the past.
I like that idea.
Hey,
I was just gonna share the match number trends to help inform this discussion. Last year there were 310 applicants, which was a historic high. And I don't think any of us is going to know until this data comes out next year if all we did was borrow 40 applicants from this year, and we're going to have a historic valley of people who might have done a year as a hospitalist but opted not to. But just to be aware that in the past 5 years or so, the numbers have led, not everybody is going to find a spot, and not every program is going to find their full number of fellows.
Is it, Patrick, is it okay for one of the panelists to ask a question?
Yeah.
As we're, I hear Liz and Rochelle and Meredith, like, as we're talking about ties to the area, one of the challenges I've faced is I have a candidate who is, again, outstanding, somebody on paper that would definitely be high on our list. But again, why are you interviewing Milwaukee? Like, I mean, we're like San Diego without the weather and the sun and the ocean. Do you? It's a great. I love living in Milwaukee, but yeah, it's not a tourist destination. Do you guys ever turn away candidates that would be really good that you don't like on paper look good, but you're like, I don't think this person has any desire to actually move here?
We have not, and maybe that's just the Midwest desire to snag someone who might really be fantastic. But I mean, if they just, in going through their information, if they look like a fantastic person, like, we want to talk to them because we think if we think we can offer something and fit into, then so not yet. We have not yet turned away someone who just looks amazing. Maybe we should, I'm not sure, but it's a good thing because you do, with the limited number of slots and a limited number of interviewers, you don't want to, fill it all with people who are not going to be someone who really has any intention of maybe ever coming to your institution.
Yeah, I think
we don't turn them away. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, just being a small city. So Charlottesville, that's where I am. I'm just going to throw out my little 2 cents here a little bit. We're a smaller city that doesn't have a big drive to like attract people, except for having a ton of wineries, which is really great. It is hard for me to not interview anybody that seems like would be a good fit, because I do feel that there's a lot of reasons why people can't come to Charlottesville. And so we may be the backup, as Patrick just kind of wrote on there. So it is definitely a tough place to be in, especially since we can no longer have people come visit Charlottesville and see what a great city it is. I think that puts some of these smaller programs at a disadvantage.
Well, Philly has such a bad reputation. I mean, I think it's getting better. And when I first started, one of the first things the PD at the time told me was, you got to try to sell Philly to all these candidates. So that is actually a big part of our day is they meet with the fellows and they do talk about, like, the fellows try to sell Philadelphia to them. And I try to tell them how great it is. And we have a whole little section in the beginning when the PD and APD speak with them. So I don't know if it's changed anybody's minds, but we do try to sell it, especially because the candidates we picked are ones that we really would like to bring.
It's funny because so Meredith, I was a fellow at CHOP and I'm a West Coaster. And when I was a senior fellow and we were on the panel to review packets, the rumor was like, oh, well, we shouldn't put anyone from the West Coast on this list because they never come here. And I was like, hey, you have multiple fellows in your program from the West Coast. You can't always predict.
Yeah. And the Midwest. I know that's, was Scott the PD then?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. You
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
predict. Like,
Yeah, because
you
he
know,
would always say
people,
that with the Midwest. Nobody from the Midwest is going to come, and
they do.
we have
Here,
somebody
I
from the
was
Midwest,
shocked
from
at who we
Milwaukee.
got.
You
I was
never
shocked
know.
this year. This year was a shocking year.
Yeah.
I might also say that I think the fellow applicants are pretty discerning as well. So if we've seen like fellow applicants who are seeking out an area that might seem geographically different to them. They're seeking it out because they've done some research and they've found a program that we offer or something that does tie into something they're interested in. So I would say the majority of ones that may sometimes feel like, oh, wow, they're pretty awesome. There is a direct link that they have sought out in doing some research. So I think a lot of the time, they're just really smart applicants who've been digging around, finding what will match their scholarship goal.
We
I have a
have
couple
oh,
questions.
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, because we've got like 20 minutes left, I have a couple great questions from the chat to throw out there. What do people do? I'll do two now, and then hopefully they're relatively short. If somebody expresses interest in your program, they like essentially email you or call. Do you? What's your recommendation in terms of replying to that candidate and letting them know how interested you are or aren't? And then the second easier question is, do you involve your fellows in the interview day, and how do you do that? Maybe starting with Chriselle, and then just kind of working around the loop like we have been.
Sure. So I'll have people interview me before recruitment season, and I'll set them up with like a 30-minute Zoom. Actually had somebody who said, I'm here in San Diego. And I said, I want to make sure it's equitable. So I'm only going to see you by Zoom, even if you are in San Diego. And she understood that. So that worked out pretty good. It's just 30 minutes of intro of the program and one-on-one asking. And then I do involve the fellows in sort of a Zoom happy hour at the end of the interview day for an hour.
I think Chriselle, we probably did something similar. We, if I get a candidate that's interested, mostly email or Zoom communication. Nothing terribly formal, just kind of to see where they're at. In terms of involving the fellows in interview day, yes, we have them do kind of the lunch hour where candidates are encouraged to, casually eat lunch, and the fellows also do that over Zoom. And it's just a, casual discussion, mostly, honestly, the fellows trying to sell them on the city, the program, and answer questions that they know best as trainees.
So if they were reaching out ahead of the interview season, then we just offer to talk over the phone. We've already turned one person down who was the same, like, I'm going to be in the city, and they wanted a tour. We're like, we gave the spiel of equity and all that, not the spiel, like the legitimate reasons why we weren't going to be able to appease their desire to come in and look at things. And then I will say our fellows are probably essential to making the interview day work. So we have a fellow of the day who's assigned, who also sends an email out with some links to the candidate. We have them go through a virtual tour with the applicant as part of the day, and then they do meet them as a large group right after lunch. They eat lunch on their own, so the applicants get a break for lunch, turn cameras off, go away and eat, and then they come back and join our fellows. And then we have 3 fellow very short breakout sessions where it's just fellows one-on-one with the applicants before the remaining 2 interviews of the day. So it would not work for us without the involvement of our fellows, for sure. So they've been a huge part.
Can I, the original question asker clarified the question to ask to be if you've interviewed somebody and then at the end of the, after like their actual interviews happened, and they reach out to you to say, express interest, what do you do then? Does that make sense as a question? Like,
we just say, we enjoyed meeting you over Zoom, and good luck with the interview season. We've never said, yeah, we think you're fantastic and we'll rank you highly. We figure we've just got to be real neutral and not, even if we think they're fantastic, but we do respond. So it's not like hanging in the ether, but just glad that you enjoyed the interview day. If you have any feedback, good luck with everything moving forward.
Yeah, I think we do something similar what Liz does too, where it's, if they have specific, sometimes there may be specific questions we get later on, or they need, something emailed to them, like the service schedule, because they're making, a spreadsheet or something. But yeah, in general, like, it was great to meet you. We're thrilled. We're excited for rank day, not completely non-committal and non-binding by any means.
We do send an email to everybody, kind of as we start to approach rank day, that just says like, we are so glad you interviewed at UVA. It's the same one to them all that just says, so glad you interviewed at UVA. Please let me know if you have any further questions about our program, and we hope you're considering us, like something of that nature. But it's like the same one that goes to everybody.
We do the same thing. And if they reach out, same thing, just a generic, thank you. Yeah.
Could we had a question basically saying, could you briefly describe your kind of like the order or structure of your interview day? Like the applicant shows up on Zoom, what are the things that you do? Starting with Rochelle.
Sure. I start with a 35-minute introduction, and I do like a nuts and bolts of the program. And then we have a 5-minute video where our fellows have already sort of talked about what it's like to be in San Diego or work at the different hospitals and be a fellow. And then we'll introduce the Zoom day, breakout rooms, and how you can mute and turn off your video for your breaks, or it's okay to talk to each other if they want to do that. And then we go through the agenda of who's going where, and that faculty are supposed to stay in their rooms, and applicants are supposed to move, which always gets a little bit confused with one faculty a year. And then we do our 20-minute interviews with 5-minute breaks in between. And we use multiple mini interviews. So I do have standardized questions. I've got a couple faculty who really want them and a couple who would prefer to go on their own. So I just require 2 and give 2 optional for the other faculty who just like structure. And then I do a close at the end and say that I'll be sending them some more information about the fellowship, and it'll include that thank you standard email.
I think ours is somewhat similar, Rochelle. One of the things I've done that helped is that initial talk I do put on our website, and that has gotten good feedback. Like that way, fellows or candidates come in, they know all about the stuff, and we're not, kind of cutting down on the day, because it can get long. I mean, for all of us, it can be a long day. So that has, just as I heard you talking, like that's something that's helped. But I come in, I meet with them, all of them into one giant Zoom area. I usually refer to as the Zoom lobby, and then our program coordinator or one of the AAs will move the candidate. They move them around the candidate, stay in their own room, and then the faculty get moved in and out. That way the candidates don't get lost. And yes, the faculty always seem to struggle with this. So I tell them just log into Zoom and then don't touch anything on the computer. But that seems to help really well. We do 3 interviews in the morning. So like, and they're half hours a piece. I do one of them. They do a lunch type thing with the fellows that's informal. We usually have them attend one of our academic conferences. A little, a break after that. They meet with a couple more faculty, including the section chief in the afternoon. And then I usually just do a virtual farewell after that.
So ours will meet in the morning via Zoom with our coordinator, and then whoever the fellow of the day is, just to kind of explain how things are going to be going. And then they go in Zoom into a separate link into our morning conference, which lasts an hour. Then after morning report, they have a little break before they meet with the program director or myself to do an overview. Then they move to do the fellow tour with the virtual tour with the fellow of the day. They take another break, and then they do a couple of their interviews, then break for lunch, then meet the fellows in a large group, and then separate into those small little fellow groups. So we have 3 of those. And then they will have usually another short break if needed before their remaining 2 interviews. And then someone in program leadership will just wrap up with them at the end of the day to see if there were any questions or anyone else that they thought of that they would like to talk to, that we can kind of set up via phone or email moving forward. And then we try to send them, we send them like the links to the tour, and we send them other links that, like Scott said, that you can maybe review ahead of time to cut down on some of the length of questions that might happen during the day if they have the opportunity to look at it before. So I think a lot of similarities probably across the board.
Are people taking you guys up on that? Because I always put out that offer to like I could set you up with whoever you didn't get to see, but I have almost nobody come back and ask to meet with someone else.
Well, I've had quite a few take me up on that offer.
Just
What
a
am I doing
handful.
wrong?
Yeah, I have a few every year that like really interested in QI, and the QI guy isn't available. Really interested in, now part of that is I actually have that person contact them after, if they tell me during the interview, like, I really want to meet, and I say, okay, I will have Dr. So-and-so contact you. And they do say that most of them take them up on that offer to talk.
I do what Brooke does, and I have about 30 to 35% of my applicants have a after the interview
Yeah.
meeting with, and it's mainly research mentors. But that's helped a ton in terms of my of matching people, or actually not matching people too, because like I think that's just as helpful when people realize that they won't be a good fit.
So I'm either overmatching them on the day of, or I'm billing the offer wrong to meet with people after.
Usually it has to do, it's usually during my interview with them, and they ask about a very specific like research interest. And I say, oh, well, we have somebody that you could talk to. They're not
Interesting.
available today.
So I build it into my interview day sign up sheet, asks
Okay.
them their research interests, and then my program coordinator tries to match them with that preemptively. So it's possible I'm just catching who they want to meet.
You're just good at pairing them, Megan. We offer a lot more than people take up on it, so we might be more similar in your boat.
Okay.
But it does help, like our phone call that we have ahead of time, sometimes you uncover that whatever the heck they put in their application is not at all what they're actually interested in. And so that has allowed us to do some different pairings than we might otherwise.
So what is this
Absolutely.
called? Like, I've never had somebody have a phone call before the interview.
I know it seems a little weird. We may be the only people who do it. It used to be that we offered the interview by phone. Like we called to say, we'd like to offer you an interview slot. And then in this day and age, that seemed to like take people a little aback, like they wouldn't answer or couldn't answer, or it seemed like a little too forward. And that has been going on for many, many moons, far before I was here. It was just a
Young
thing
people
that,
don't answer phone calls anymore.
yes. So then we've switched it to, we send an email and it just says, hey, we'd love to touch base for like 5 minutes, just so that we could better learn about what you're interested in to better set up your interview day. And it really is just limited to literally 5 minutes or less. Like, you know, this is what I learned from your application. This is the scholarship you might be interested in. Is that really it? Or are you looking to do something different? Literally just to try to make it an easier job of pairing people. And so, and it's been going on since the beginning of time here, and I'm not sure where it started from, but yeah, it is a little different.
We send out a form and just have them fill out their different interests, and even some personal stuff, not too personal, but just to get an idea of what they're looking for. Like we said, like if they want to come to the city, I don't even remember what questions were, but we were able to pair people up with good interviewers that we think would be a good match with them just from that sheet.
Kind of follow maybe Meredith, just going back around the circle. 2 questions essentially. Do you do your fellows interview, and if so, do they evaluate, and what questions do they ask? And does your PD interview every candidate?
Our PD does interview everybody. And then we try to get our APD to interview also, but it's more important that we get the PD to interview. As for the fellows, they don't interview. They just kind of meet with them and they talk to them for about an hour. We do, I mean, some of them will have feedback for us, so we'll definitely take that into consideration. Or we'll ask them, you know, what did you think? Is there anybody who stood out? But no formal evaluation from them.
Liz?
So we do not have the fellows interview. We try to stress that those little fellow breakouts are not interviews, even though it probably may feel like some type of interview. They do not fill out formal evals, but we debrief at the end of every interview day with the fellows, kind of in person in the office, just to see if they had any red flags or if they really connected, or get their input that way, so that we can then use it in doing the rank list. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second question related? It just slipped my head.
If the fellows interviewed, what
Oh.
questions do they ask? So
Okay.
the answer would be no.
We try to have sort of themes in each of those fellow groups, so that if the applicants aren't saying anything, you know, this might be where you talk about what's going on in Indy or something like that, but there aren't any specific questions that we want our fellows to ask them. We try to make it casual as you can be.
I think ours is probably similar to everybody else. Yeah, I do try to meet with everybody. You know, I rearrange my service schedule so that I'm available during those times. The fellows don't evaluate again. I think like everybody else is kind of debrief. They are really, I found, helpful with, you know, interpersonal communications and, you know, kind of getting a feel for who they are as people, which I think is important because, you know, they're going to be working with them 1, maybe 2 years. And the fellows do tend to have a lot of pride in the program too. So they're also a little bit, you know, interested in who they're going to bring on. But nothing formal that factors in to the overall, you know, initial rank list that we make.
I do interview every candidate, and the fellows do not formally interview them. They just meet them in the happy hour, but I do a debrief with them, and they do help with red flags, and that they do inform the rank list. We don't have set questions for the fellows to ask candidates, but we have set questions for the fellows to make sure they answer during their happy hour, which is like, where do they live and how do they find or choose their mentor and what's their schedule like? And that way, if it's crickets and nobody's asking, at least they have something to cover.
All right, I think you guys did a great job. And we thank all of our panelists today for joining us. Patrick, you said there's no more questions in the chat?
That is correct. But fire away if you.
If anybody
have...
wants to just say something, please unmute yourself.
I actually have a curious question myself, which is who's in your interview committee? Like who are the people both reading files and interviewing for you? Because I think there's talking to program directors. I think there's a lot of heterogeneity about that. Chriselle, do you want to start?
I have a selection committee, and so I asked them to participate in 2 interview days, but I don't ask them to do all of them. And they are usually they're core faculty, and they're the most diverse I can get us to be. And then I wanted to add something else that we do is we publish our interview dates at the start of the season. So even though we haven't invited candidates, we haven't decided who we want to interview, we just put our dates out ahead of time just so people can sort of think about their schedules. And then we don't have Thalamus, but we do email out ahead of time somewhere right when we close our applications. We say we will send you an invitation for interview on this date at that time, so they can reserve that time so they can be available for email, because some people are post call and some people are in a meeting, and that's helped us.
I think you know, who goes through the applications. There's a few of us. The interview and selection committee are the same. It's probably about, you know, about 10 or 12 are faculty. They usually tend to be either research men, fellow training. In terms of the logistics, we just kind of still go by, you know, old school, you know, pen and paper and Excel spreadsheets and stuff, which seems to work well for us.
Myself, the program director, and one other person are the ones who review the evaluations and errors. So we go through initially, and then our interview committee is pretty close to like our PEC committee or our clinical competency committee. So the ones who have the most interaction with fellows and who have the most investment in the program. And then we kind of have another subgroup that we use to fill in some of the interview slots who are outside of those kind of core individuals who interview, because then they end up being the people who we sit down at the end and go through the rank list.
So we totally revamped everything last year, and we now have a committee that will stay on for a couple years. We sent an email out to see who was interested, and then we kind of went through it, and we picked the core interviewers based on their interests and diversity. And then so they all interview. We try to get them to interview matching up to the candidates, their interests, and then we bring on one outside person that we think would be a good person to interview.
All
Awesome.
right, I think that brings us right about to 5 o'clock on the East Coast. Megan, what is it, 2 o'clock over
2
there?
o'clock. It's 2 o'clock here. Many meetings to go.
It's time for dinner here.
I put
Thank
the
you.
view, I put the view only link to the slides in here, but I'm sure we can post it along with the video onto YouTube.
Again, thank you for everyone for joining, and we are planning an ONTPD boot camp at AAP.